right, y'all. Welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. And I just kind of want to chime in on something that I did yesterday. But, before I get into all that, you know what to do. Like this broadcast, share this broadcast, and subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. Hit that subscribe button right now. That way you'll be notified whenever I upload a new video. But without further ado, I'm just gonna go into it. Now, if you follow me on the Twitters, I made a little bit of a stir yesterday, a little bit more than usual. Like, as most of you know, if you follow me, I post a lot of satirical tweets. Some of them land, some of them don't. That's okay. But every now and then I get one that goes viral, and it just goes crazy. So I just want to kind of talk a little bit about why I tweeted it and the point I was making, which honestly, the point is pretty obvious that I'm making, but I kind of wanted to go a little bit deeper into it because I do think that it highlights a very important issue, especially when it concerns where our society is going. So yesterday morning, I got it in my head to tweet this out, and I'll put it up for you. The tweet says, breaking. And by the way, whenever I put breaking, that means it's satire unless I indicate otherwise. Now, I know not everybody knows that. It went to a lot of people who didn't know me. So, but I'll get to that in a second. It says, breaking. Portland restaurant comes up with innovative new idea to promote racial equity, creating separate sections for Black and white diners. And then I made up a quote, we want to provide a safe space for our diners of color to ease the trauma of living in this racist society, according to the owner of this fictitious restaurant that I made up on the fly. So now, anybody who lives in my world, if you're a conservative and you pay attention to politics, you know exactly what this tweet means, and you even know why I posted it. I mean, first off, I said it took place in Portland, Oregon, which is a very, 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 very deep blue Smurf city. And what we're seeing from the progressive movement, and I'm talking about the far left, I'm not talking about just regular people who vote Democrat. You are seeing some of this going on in different areas of society. But this is the point I was making, that this is how ridiculous things have gotten, where you actually have people advocating for racial segregation. I'm going to get to that in a second. But here's the thing about this tweet, and pretty much any satirical tweet that I post that goes viral, there are a lot of people who think they're real. Now, in some cases, most people know it's a joke, or they figure it out after they read it and kind of see the reaction to it. This one, a lot more people thought was real than normal. Now, the thing about satire is that to write it, you have to exaggerate to a point to where it's so ridiculous that nobody would actually believe that's true. But I just wrote an article in Red State's VIP section that it's not impossible, but it's very difficult in 2022 because real life is crazy right now. It's already crazy enough. So if I post something and I exaggerate it, a lot of people can see, well, yeah, I can see that happening. And honestly, this fake news story could happen. And as a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it did in the future. I mean, I've had a couple tweets that came true because of how crazy society is right now. And I watch society, I write about it, I podcast about it. It's crazy. So the reason why a lot of people thought this was real, and it was mostly conservatives, is because there is a movement on the progressive left to separate people by race. They are obsessed with race. And I don't think it's because they actually care about racism. Honestly, I really don't think they do. Maybe some of the regular folks who identify as progressives, but when it comes to your activists and your media figures and your politicians, they don't really care about racism, right? They view racism not as a problem to be solved, but as something to be used as a weapon against their political opposition. That's why they call everybody racist, just for disagreeing with them. If you don't agree with the policy, then that means you're a racist. And it's not just racism. They use other types of bigotry in that way too. Like if you want stricter border enforcement, that means you're a xenophobe. Or if you're against abortion, that means you're a sexist. Yada, 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 list goes on. Everybody knows exactly what I'm talking about. And in so doing, a lot of progressives are trying to regress. So I want to use an example of how they're already doing this in our schools. Public schools, government. I wrote an article about this a while ago. There's this thing, there's these groups, they call them affinity groups. Now, in an affinity group, when you're looking at public K through 12 schools, these are groups that are centered around certain interests. So it could be, I don't know, like a group of students who like lacrosse. You can form an affinity group for people who like to play lacrosse or chess, or if you're into comics or what have you. It's really for shared interests and for students to get to be around people who are into some of the same things that they are. But recently, over the past couple of years, we have schools pushing for racial affinity groups. Now, these are groups that are specific to one ethnicity or race or what have you, which means that it excludes other students based on skin color. Let's say it's a Latino group. Well, if you're white, you can't join it. If you're black, you can't join it. This is something that public schools are sponsoring. So this is the government actually supporting and instituting racial segregation. Now, back in the day when I was in high school, they had my high school had the BSU, the Black Student Union. So that was for black students. But if you were white and you were interested, you could join the group. It did not discriminate. Now, the way it turned out is that it was mostly black, obviously, because it's a black student group. But if you were Hispanic, or if you're white, or if you're Asian, you can go to the meetings, you can participate in the activities. That's not what I'm talking about here. These affinity groups actually exclude people based on their race, ethnicity, nationality, what have you. So I'm going to read a quote to you that I included in the article that I wrote a while ago. This is from the Great Schools Partnership. And this is their explanation of racial affinity groups. Quote, a racial affinity group is a group of people sharing a common race who gather with the intention of finding connection, support, and inspiration. Racial affinity groups can happen within any profession or organization, including education. These resources are specifically targeted to the development of racial affinity groups for educators of color, where such groups can provide participants support to survive the racial isolation that exists in many schools and institutions. So there you have it. I mean, and we have seen this happening in schools in Chicago, I believe also in Wisconsin. And these schools are actually promoting this. It's probably happening in more areas than we think. Now, there's a group called Parents Defending Education, and they're tackling a lot of these quote unquote woke ideas that are being infused into these public schools. And they have filed lawsuits against these schools who are having these racial affinity groups because it violates the Civil Rights Act and it violates the Constitution. Like, you're not supposed to do that. And I have no idea what these people were thinking, but obviously these are progressives. These aren't white racist conservatives who are like Bull Connor. These are people who claim to care about Black and brown people and Asians and to care about marginalized minorities. And they're promoting segregation. And guess what? Woke segregation is just as bad as Jim Crow segregation. What they're doing here is they're trying to divide people. So when I posted that tweet, I was talking about issues like this. This is just one example of how the hard left has tried to promote racial separation. I mean, you see it even on college campuses with safe spaces. You know, when I was younger, you didn't need a safe space if you were Black. If you wanted to hang out with Black people, you just hung out with Black people. And that was it. You didn't need special accommodations. You didn't need to be coddled by your college who supposedly cares so much about you because you're in such a racist society. I mean, people coming, I mean, I've talked to people of color from a younger generation, and they say they've never even really experienced racism. They've never been called the N-word. That's progress. When I was a kid, I got called the N-word a lot. And this is in LA. We're not talking about in the deep South here. So I understand. I mean, I've never said that racism isn't an issue. I never will. It is an issue. Do I think it's the issue that the progressives make it out to be? No, I don't. But I do think it's something that needs to be addressed. But this is not how to address it. So when I posted that tweet about a restaurant separating people by race, it was believable because we're seeing the progressive left doing this right now. in higher learning institutions and in K through 12 schools. Now, there were some people who were mad about it. And I'll let you guess who they were. No, I won't. I'll just tell you. It was people on the left who were mad about it. Nobody on the right cared. I mean, even when people on the right reacted to it and thought it was real and then later found out that it wasn't, they thought it was funny. They didn't care. It was progressives who got mad. It was Democrats who got mad. Why? Because they know that what I'm saying is true. They may not agree with this stuff personally, but they know that there are a lot of people on their side who vote the way they do, who believe in a lot of the policy positions that they believe in, who support these things, and they're trying to do it. So they don't like the fact that I was mocking it. They didn't like the fact that I was drawing attention to it. I guarantee 100% of these people would not have been mad if I posted a satirical tweet making fun of conservatives, which I have done in the past, which, I haven't done in a while. So, I mean, if somebody wanted to criticize me for not having criticized conservatives in a while through satire, I'll take that criticism and I'll step up my game in that regard, because there's plenty of foolishness that happens on the right too. Even though I'm on the right, I can still point out the foolishness. But right now we're talking about the left. And the reason they were mad, like I said, is because I was attacking their team. Like, instead of saying, okay, maybe I didn't like the satire or whatever, but yeah, this is an issue, they just got mad at me for pointing it out. No, I'm going to point it out. It should be pointed out. This is poison. This is societal cancer. And we can't let these people pull us back to the 60s under the guise of being tolerant and woke, or whatever you want to call it. But here's the other point. And I did a radio hit earlier today on, I believe, on Brian Suit's show. Victoria Taft was filling in for him. And, one thing I brought up to her is, what is the fact that this was so believable? And I'll take some ownership of that. Maybe I should have exaggerated it more so that more people would know that it was satire. But I guarantee you, I could have exaggerated this 100% more than I did, and people still would have thought it was real. But what if I had tweeted this 5 years ago? Or what if I had tweeted it 10 years ago? Think about that. How many people would have thought it was real? I would say very few, because this was not going on to the extent that it is right now 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. So what does this say about our society that I can tweet something like that and so many people think it's really happening? Because we can't put it past these people. We've seen them doing it. So to me, that's what we should be looking at. What does this say about where our society is going if you have a group of people who are influential enough to get our public schools to have racially segregated groups, or to have this going on in colleges? I wouldn't put it past them for an instant to do this in public corporations as well. As a matter of fact, it's kind of already happening, and I'll talk about that at another time. But we're seeing this type of racial segregation, or this focus on race, and it's all under the guise of trying to help Black people. I'm going to tell you right now, when it comes to progressives, again, I'm not talking about people who might lean left or might vote Democrat. I'm talking about the hard left. When they say they're trying to help us, they are not. They are stabbing us in the back. I would say most of them probably don't even know they're doing it. A lot of them do, and they don't care. Like when they're talking about, oh, we need fewer police officers on the street because of what happened to George Floyd. That's not helping us, because we had skyrocketing crime rates, and guess who got hurt the most by that? Black people, disproportionately affected by violent crime rates, because these people wanted fewer police on the streets. Yeah, what happened to George Floyd was wrong. I'm glad those officers, or at least Chauvin, is getting what he's getting. But that does not mean that you take steps like demonizing all police so that they're not doing their jobs and there's fewer of them, because that's going to affect the people that you pretend to care about. So I'm getting off on a little bit of a rant here, but still, I just wanted to kind of talk about that tweet and talk about the reaction to it. I mean, it spread pretty far. It made it to Twitter's trending section. But again, why was it so believable? Shouldn't we be troubled by that? Because I am. I think I'm just going to leave it there for right now. I'll sign out for right now, and I'll catch you on the other side.